We know that university engagement with the industry, professions and community is a powerful enabler of student learning, and that's why we're here. But it also provides career-ready graduates, which is why industry is interested in the way that we are putting forward education. And it also adds to a society that's worth living in, and that's what Uncle Alan was talking about. Charles Sturt University is very proud of EFPI and the fact that EFPI belongs to Charles Sturt Uni. We know it's a sector-leading institute for the promotion of quality-based education. So thank you to all the people at EFPI for putting on this summit. So the themes of the conference, the promises of university education, with the emphasis, as Francisca said, on the promises. What are we promising? Blending, including and integrating for future practice. Now I've put the emphasis there on blending because that's what I'm going to talk about this morning. That's probably the only thing I'm equipped to talk about. The others are less part of my research. Blending technologies and experiences, the promises that technology will be debated in the first panel session this morning. And I will be staying around for the conference for the whole 2 days, so I'm looking forward to being part of the audience in that one. So what are the promises with technology? I have been working with technology since the 70s. In fact, I describe myself as a digital native when digital meant 8K and paper tape, but that's the era that I'm from, and I try to keep up with all the latest gadgets that my daughter brings through the door, as I'm sure you all do as well. So we promise with technologies better student experiences, more student-centredness, increased access to information, flexible access to course materials, better developed digital literacies, better information sharing, stronger communication and collaboration, a stronger voice for students, move from physical to virtual teaching spaces, and learning and teaching tailored to student needs. We don't promise much, do we? The second promises are about widening participation or student inclusion, and there's a second panel session tomorrow that will debate the promises there. Promises of equity, employability, value adding through workplace learning, better developed critical thinking capabilities, better partnerships with industry. Lots of promises. And thirdly, integrating work and learning. This is considered one of the key strategies for how PBE is practiced in higher education, and sessions throughout the 2 days will continue to address that theme. So can universities deliver on these promises to staff, students, communities, and the society into the future? That's for us to determine in these 2 days. What I thought I might talk about in the time that's been allocated to me, and thank you for giving me this space to do this today, I thought I might talk about virtual learning spaces and what I'm calling actual learning spaces, and also blending learning spaces, and see where that takes us. Learning spaces for LBE. Now, what's LBE? Never heard of that. Lecture-based education. I made it up because it rhymes with PBE. So, so that's where we are today, isn't it? I'm lecturing at you. We're doing some learning, I hope, maybe. This is a lecture theatre from Albury at Charles Sturt University. It's almost as yellow as this lecture theatre. What does a learning space for PBE look like? Well, I got this photo when I was visiting the dentistry school. I think this one was in orange at Charles Sturt University. Looks a bit like a lecture theatre actually, because everything's in rows and students are hopefully listening to the lecturer at the front. Actually, there's no students, there's only robots there. These are the very expensive dummies that you use to practice with when you're a dentist. But everything's in rows and you're all doing as the lecturer says. But instead of just listening and writing as you're doing today, aren't you? Good. At least they're learning by doing as well. So that's one sort of learning space for PBE. It's impressive, I must say. It's hugely expensive, very impressive, and I'm not scared to go to the dentist anymore. Are you? When we see that. No, actually, I've been incredibly impressed in my first 4 months at Charles Sturt Uni with the quality of the learning spaces for training the professions. Unbelievable. You don't see many lecture theatres, or at least the lecture theatres aren't used very often. Most of the spaces have been set up to replicate the kind of spaces that our graduates are going to be working in when they graduate. There's Amanda from policing. I saw the police simulation village. It's a real village with a pub and bus and a police station where the police practice in simulation what they are, the problems that they are supposed to solve once they graduate. I've seen speech pathologists' offices where the speech pathology students are working with clients, either in role play or people who've volunteered from outside to come in and they can practice their skills as a speech pathologist. I've seen scenario suites where paramedical students learn their skills in being a paramedic, what do you call that, in different settings, so in people's homes, in streets and so on. So these are simulation suites. There's a big emphasis on practice-based education being authentic and real and situated in the kind of context that they will be operating in when they graduate. I'm sure at your own universities you've seen the same sort of thing, not just spaces like this. So learning spaces for PBE are really important, and they're challenging because they're also really expensive. I just popped in a picture there of Dubbo campus because it's the only campus of Sturt Uni that I haven't been to yet, but I'm about to go to. But I also popped in a little news headline about $95 million that Newcastle University are spending on their education precinct in downtown Newcastle. It's a very expensive thing building buildings, and particularly building buildings that aren't lecture spaces, because lecture spaces, LBE spaces, were designed for cost-effective, low-cost transmission of university education to mass numbers. But the PBE spaces that we're building are expensive too, particularly when you start taking account of all the technologies that need to be blended, and here we start talking about blended learning spaces. Technologies such as this, actually 20 years ago when I started at University of Wollongong, my learning spaces committee that I set up used to meet to decide which one lecture theatre that year would get the $500,000 projector so that lecturers could do projection. So in 20 years we've come a long way where every space is equipped with multiple projectors, and the cost has come down, but it's still a big expense. Now of course we expect things like this, Tele-presence. So at Sturt Uni with its multiple campuses there's a lot of emphasis on video conferencing and Adobe Connect and all sorts of other technologies that allow you to collaborate at a distance. We don't have a Tele-presence suite yet, but I'm aiming to get something like this where it feels as if you're just in the room with those virtual participants who could be anywhere in the world because of the way the room's been set up. This is fairly expensive technology, but it's the kind of technology that we will definitely be seeing within the next 10 years in every university. All universities are also creating spaces where students can create, produce, collaborate, communicate, as they start to become co-creators of the student learning experience, as they become the producers of the resources, not just the staff being the producers of the resources. So learning hubs, media hubs, student hubs, these are the sort of things that we're seeing in universities, not just Charles Sturt University. Very expensive stuff, but still none of this is as expensive as, say, $95 million to build a building in downtown Newcastle. When we come to virtual learning spaces, I've never seen $95 million spent on virtual learning spaces, and yet we have promised that this technology is going to change the world. It may be changing people's individual lives as everybody owns their own set of technologies now, and we know from all the digital natives research literature that most people own at least 3 mobile devices, if not more. And that's not including the ones in your bottom drawer that no longer work because they're out of date. But no one has spent $95 million doing virtual learning spaces. We're still spending a lot of money on bricks rather than clicks. I'd like to imagine the promise of a world where we spend as much money on the virtual learning spaces as what we spend on our very beautiful and wonderful, and I don't want to get rid of them, authentic learning spaces. So let's just explore some of the virtual learning spaces, and this is the plug for the book. which, as Francisca says, I always forget to do, and I'm never going to get rich selling this book, so please go and buy a copy, because I get 3 cents every time one is sold. You know, it's such a... the power of role-based e-learning. So this is one part of virtual learning spaces, and I think it's not the only way of doing things, of course, although I expect everybody now to do a role play or a simulation after you leave this room, but it's one way, and I think it's a very effective way, a very powerful way, and I'd like to see $95 million spent on it. The reason why I wrote this book is because I feel that role plays and simulations can be done quite cheaply in a very low cost way. So that's why I started on it, because we're always trying to find ways to do things cheaply. Now in my job as PVC, I'm going to try and find ways of doing things more expensively. I want the same budget that facilities management has. Yeah, okay. The book comes from quite a lot of work, and Jan Orell sitting in the audience there, I think you worked at Carrick. Carrick, at the time, this project was funded as a Carrick project. So Project Enroll was a national project at Carrick, which became ALTC or AUTC, then ALTC is now OLT in Australia, the Office of Learning and Teaching. It was a national project to encourage, that's the EN, encourage role-based e-learning. And so many of the case studies I talk about in the book and today are from that project. So thanks to Jan when she used to work at Carrick. So let me talk to you a little bit about what a role play could look like. This one I really like, Save Wallaby Forest, from Kristen Demetrius at Deakin University. And I think she's still there. Anyone from Deakin University? Yep. Still doing lovely stuff? Yeah. I like this one because it's quite an easy one to set up. It did have quite a bit of money spent on it as a teaching and learning grant within Deakin, because they had a nice trigger video made, a 5-minute trigger video at the beginning, just to get students into the scenario. The scenario is there's a piece of forest where there's some rare wallabies that can't be interfered with, but there are developers who want to take over that land and build a subdivision. And so there are only 2 stakeholders in this role play. One stakeholder is the developer, and the other stakeholder are the Save Wallaby Forest Action Group. The subject this is taught in is public relations, so it's not the environment. The students here are going to be public relations students, and in this role play they are being either the public relations firm for the action group or the public relations firm for the developers. And they have to learn how to write media releases to support their client. So it's practice-based education, it's authentic, it's situated. So it's quite an easy role play to run for Kristen, because there's only 2 stakeholders. And I'm not sure, I think she acts in the role of the mayor who has to make a decision about who argued the best case. It's quite a nice one. It's very low cost because you just run it on your LMS, on your Learning Management Systems discussion forum. It's done as a series of emails. This is just a screenshot from another one from the University of Western Australia, Diplomatic Encounters, but you can see it's just a threaded email conversation. So it's asynchronous. Students don't have to meet in the classroom at the same time. They do need to be participating in the same weeks as everyone else, because a role play tends to take 2 to 4 weeks. But they don't have to be there at exactly the same time. So it's an asynchronous discussion forum. Everybody has that technology in their university. It's nothing new that has to happen. What has to happen is that the lecturer has to design a powerful scenario and some good meaty stakeholders whose role you can slip into, so you're in the shoes of somebody else. And in the case of practice-based education, you're in the shoes of the profession that you're about to graduate into. So in diplomatic encounters, these are forthcoming politicians and diplomats. In this one, from the University of Melbourne in 2002, this was early childhood education, so this was a role play that was about a daycare centre and the ethical issues involved in running a daycare centre in terms of the diversity of parents and children and races that were in the childhood centre. But again, it was just done on a discussion forum with a really nice trigger video which set the scenario, set the scene. Environmental decision making from Macquarie University. I don't think this one's still running. Anyone here from Macquarie University? By the way, this one here was developed by a lecturer at the University of Melbourne who's now at Macquarie University. So Manjula, and I can't pronounce her last name. Anyone from Macquarie in education? She's still head of school there? Oh, okay. Gary Brearley from Macquarie University developed this one with Liz Devonshire, who's now at UWS, I think. So people move around. But this one is a typical environmental one where there's an environmental scenario and the students, this case, have a number of different roles that they have to slip into to put themselves in someone else's shoes to understand a complex ethical issue. Now, this is the most famous role play. This is started at Melbourne University at the time I was at Melbourne University when I supported it with a teaching and learning grant. It then moved to Macquarie University, and now it's run at Deakin University, as well as Charles Sturt Uni, as well as sometimes Wollongong University, and a whole number of places. So this is a real survivor, this one. It's quite a complex one. There are 70 stakeholders in this one, 70 roles that students choose. Anything ranging from the President of the United States to the Prime Minister of Australia to the Prime Minister of Israel, and so on, as well as heads of various militant groups. Anyone who is a real person in the Middle Eastern politics situation is in the role play. Each time the role play is run, a scenario is written 1 month into the future, so it's very current. It's about what's currently happening in Middle Eastern politics. And students line up at the lecturer's door to try and get the key role. They camp there overnight trying to get into the key roles because it's such a well-known simulation. There are students at Macquarie University who enrol from other faculties into this subject because it's such a well-known role play. It's the highest number of enrolments in an arts subject in Macquarie University at the time that Andrew Vincent was there running it. He's not there now. But it's what's important about this one is it's run usually across 2 or 3 universities. It isn't just the home university. So when Andrew Vincent was running it at Macquarie, it ran with Georgetown University in the US and American University of Cairo in Egypt. And so students are mixed up. So the President of America could be a Cairo student or an Australian student and so on, which really annoys the Americans. So that's why we do it. It runs for 4 weeks and it finishes with what this photo is, which was an international video conference, which is a simulation of a UN peace conference, and they have to present resolutions and try to come to some sort of resolution about the scenario. The lecturers who run this say that it's spooky how, although they write the scenario 4 weeks into the future, by the time the thing's been running for 4 weeks, that it mirrors very much current day things that are happening in Middle Eastern politics. As I say, students have been involved in this role play for 20 years and they come up to the lecturers afterwards when they've become diplomats or politicians and say how much they remember this experience of all the learning experiences they had in lecture theatres. This was a very powerful experience because it's not a lecture, it is a role play simulation. The mixture of technologies there with the Middle Eastern politics one is it's asynchronous. So for 4 weeks, students are communicating in their time and their own place across 3 different countries. But then they come together for a synchronous event. So synchronous meaning at the same time. So the synchronous event is the video conference. Actually, as an aside, I remember the first time we did video conference in this role play was at the University of Melbourne 20 years ago. And video conference was not something that universities had. The only video conference unit that we had access to was at the American Embassy in St Kilda Road. So we went down to the American Embassy in St Kilda Road to do the video conference with Georgetown University in Washington. And as you see, the students quite like getting dressed up. No one told them to do that. So the students who are, students play in teams, usually of 3 and 4 representing one character, so they have to coordinate amongst themselves as well. And when we turned up at the American Embassy dressed like this, we had trouble getting in, not surprisingly. Perhaps they didn't like our brand of tea towel. Perhaps they thought this was really bad acting, I don't know. But the students have continued this tradition, and as I said, no one told them to dress up. They just feel that in this final event they like to. So the students who are representing the FBI come in black suits with little headsets and, you know, They really get into it. It's not a first year subject, it's a third year subject, so it really does, it's not shallow, it really is intense in terms of their understandings of Middle Eastern politics. I think this would be a very bad role play to run in the high schools, and I know that Andrew Vincent did try to run it in high schools once, and the media splash about how he was training terrorists didn't go away for about 3 or 4 weeks. He had to cancel the role play. So I know this picture looks like he's training terrorists, but he's not. He's training professionals to be diplomats, politicians, and helping people understand intensively the intricacies of Middle Eastern politics. So these are low-cost role plays, not the $95 million ones that I aspire to. But then along came a few years ago, not MOOCs, but Second Life. That was the media thing a few years ago, wasn't it? Second Life. Who's of Second Life now? Wow, I'm hoping to get it going again because it needs $95 million. But so real life versus Second Life. Second Life is a very graphically immersive environment. It's synchronous, not asynchronous, so you have to be there, but you're meeting people from all around the world in your avatar, and people loved getting into their avatar. So here's a more expensive role-play simulation that I came across at Duke University called Virtual Peace. It's done not in Second Life, but something like Second Life. It's about a disaster and the humanitarian response to the disaster. So the various roles that people play are Oxfam, United Nations, and so on. You can see WFP, various aid organisations who come together to try and respond to how they're going to provide help to this disaster, which was a hurricane in Barbados, I think it is, that they set it. So it's done through avatars, it's synchronous, it's highly graphically immersive. But what's interesting about this is that the students actually come in to a lab to do it, rather than doing it from their own places. And the lecturer moves around and watches what's happening and then records bits of it that he or she wants to use afterwards in the debriefing. Because with online role play, the maximum learning comes from the debriefing component. There's a lot of learning happens during the role play, but it's when you debrief afterwards that you learn the most, and that's a very guided activity from the lecturer or the academic, from the teacher. In this case, the lecturer can record key moments to play back to the students in the debriefing thing, saying, now, this is what you did at this bit. Do you think we could have done something different? And then you have a discussion about how else you could have done it. So although this is quite an intense role play, because rather than being asynchronous, it's synchronous, which means you have to respond now and in time to the action, which is much more like real life, at least you get a chance afterwards to redo it and to think about it and reflect. So I thought this was quite a nice one, but an expensive one because this is not using your learning management system. Another example is from Glasgow Caledonian University, Virtual Patient, and they have various scenarios, but this one's HeartBot. Again, it's Second Life. This one is Second Life. The patient is a tutor, and what's nice about this is the tutor could be anywhere in the UK. So you have pools and pools of tutor in medical education, pools of tutors who you call on, who know how to sort of work to a script. And the woman in this one is the doctor, so she's the student, she's the doctor she's about to become, and she's practicing diagnosis of the symptoms of the virtual patient here. So this is something that we do in medical education all the time. Not we, I'm not a medical person, they do in medical. Who's here from medical education? Jan, that's right. Medical education all the time in terms of practicing your skills in diagnosis. You often have pools of volunteers or tutors who you work on. But in this case, the volunteers and the student don't have to be in the university. They could be anywhere because they're meeting in a virtual learning space. They're meeting in Second Life to work on the problem. So it gives much more flexibility to the students, and it also is very flexible for the tutors because they are hard to get, people who can work to a script and pretend they're sick and keep up the role. I know why I like online role play is because I'm not an actress and I cannot keep on a role. Every time I have to do a role play face to face, I start giggling. I can't do it. But I can do online role play because you've got time to just reflect and type and keep in your role. So different spaces for different types of people. I know where my space is, behind the computer, not out the front of the room. So I think this is a really quite nice one, and it's a good application of Second Life. So I guess the question that we can debate in our last 10 minutes is, does virtual replace actual? So I've talked about virtual learning spaces, and I've talked about actual learning spaces like we're in today. Simulations, like the one I just showed you, are really great for practicing skills in authentic situations, and sometimes those authentic situations are one that you might not be able to get to in real life or in real time. For example, although heartbots are fairly, as a medical student, you work quite intensely because you're trying to be exposed to almost every possible thing that could go wrong in the human body by working 24 hours a day in a hospital. That's why it's been how it's been explained to me how we teach medical students. We teach them, we ask them to be in the hospital doing prac long hours because we want them to be exposed to as many different situations as possible. If we could actually put all of those situations that are ever likely to go wrong with the human body into a virtual world, then they would be able to practice those things in a more relaxed mode rather than having to work the intensive hours that they do in hospitals. Simulations are also good. We often, we talk about practicing doing a simulation of a nuclear power plant, because you can't blow up a nuclear power plant as a student, but you can in a simulation. So putting yourself into positions that you're unlikely to experience in real life, just in your daily real life, but still providing that situation to the student. Role plays, which are a little bit different from simulations, but the role plays allow you to explore ethical dilemmas of professional practice. And I know that Joyce Higgs is quite passionate about that. In training for the professions, we need to be training for the ethics. And it's one of the graduate attributes that I'm sure all of our universities have, is that we say we're going to turn out ethical graduates. And very often it's hard to teach ethics. It's better to experience the ethics by perhaps doing it as part of a role play in a virtual world. So I don't think virtual replaces actual, though, although I can imagine a whole range of places where virtual adds to or extends what we're doing in actual learning spaces. I think that virtual complements actual. I think that we use virtual to scaffold learner experiences, giving them practice before they come for the actual experience in the actual learning space, so that they're not flying blind. So, for example, laboratory skills, you might want them still to come into a laboratory, but you give them practice with the experiment before they come, so that everything isn't hinged on everything happening in the actual space. And also you want them to be able to practice those skills after they leave the actual experience. So I think the two complement each other, and we lead to a blended learning scenario. So that's the challenges that I am putting forward for the start of the conference, that I hope you'll explore in the other sessions, and bringing in perhaps the understanding of actual learning spaces and virtual learning spaces and how to blend them.